My parents wore black to my wedding, I said, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The words echoed in my mind, but they felt like a distant memory now. It wasn't just their clothing that shocked me. It was the weight of their silence, the coldness in their eyes. I had never imagined a moment that should have been filled with joy and celebration would turn into one of the most painful experiences of my life. The wedding was supposed to be a dream come true, a day when I married the man I loved, surrounded by the people who mattered most to me. But everything changed when my parents arrived. They walked into the church, dressed in solemn black, as if they were attending a funeral. My heart sank. The smiles that I had hoped to see were replaced by expressions I couldn't quite read: pity, disappointment, or perhaps both. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. My father didn't speak. My mother barely acknowledged me. I could feel their eyes on me, heavy and judgmental, as if they were watching me make the biggest mistake of my life. The ceremony went on, but every step I took toward my future felt like a step away from my past. Jake, my husband-to-be, stood beside me, smiling as if nothing was wrong. But I could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut through. I had to fight the urge to turn around and walk away. My parents' disapproval was suffocating. As I walked down the aisle, I felt like I was walking alone. The weight of their disappointment pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. I tried to focus on Jake, on the life we were about to start together, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my parents were silently judging me, condemning my choices. I could hear the whispers among the guests, the hushed voices that spoke louder than any words ever could. They were talking about my parents, why they had come dressed like mourners, why they were acting as if they were attending a funeral instead of a wedding. I couldn't escape it. The questions flooded my mind, drowning out everything else. What had I done to deserve this? Why was my wedding day tainted by their judgment? When it was time for the reception, the tension only grew. My parents refused to join in the celebration. They stood on the outskirts, watching from a distance, as if they were waiting for something to go wrong. Their coldness was a sharp contrast to the warmth of the other guests. I tried to approach them, to find out what was going on, but each time I did, they turned away. My mother's face remained a mask of indifference, and my father's gaze never met mine. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I watched as my parents remained detached, as if they were strangers rather than the people who had raised me. I had never felt more alone in my life. I could still feel the weight of their gaze on me as the reception continued. My parents, standing across the room, hadn't moved an inch since the ceremony. It was as if they were statues, lifeless, watching but not participating. I tried to focus on the music, on the people around me, but it was impossible. Every time I looked over at my parents, their cold expressions cut through the warmth of the celebration like a knife. Jake, my new husband, was busy mingling with the guests, laughing, and enjoying the evening as if everything was perfect. I should have been happy. This was the start of our new life together, but all I could feel was the emptiness in my chest. The thought of what was happening between me and my parents was too much to bear. Why had they turned against me like this? What had I done wrong? I remembered how they used to be, how they had raised me with love and care, how I had always been their little girl. Now, it seemed like all of that had been erased. I hadn't even been able to speak to them since they arrived. I wanted to pull them aside, ask them what was going on, but every time I tried to approach, they turned their backs. My mother didn't even look at me when I stood nearby, and my father's eyes were focused on something far away, as if he was lost in his own world. The emptiness grew inside me, and I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening. It wasn't just that they were unhappy with my wedding. It was the feeling that they didn't care about me anymore, that I had become invisible to them. My mind raced with questions, but there were no answers, only silence. As the night went on, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away from me, something important, something I couldn't get back. It was as if I was losing them all over again, but this time, it felt permanent. As I stood by the dance floor, watching Jake laugh and talk with the guests, I felt a pang of guilt. Should I be happy? I should have been. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. But all I could think about was the look in my parents' eyes. It was so cold, so indifferent. I felt like I was being torn apart, trying to hold on to the family I had known, while stepping forward into the unknown with Jake. But could I ever be truly happy if my family wasn't there? I glanced over at my parents one last time. They were still standing there, unmoving, distant. A part of me wanted to run to them, plead with them to come back, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They had made their choice, and there was nothing I could do to change it. I could feel the coldness of the night as I sat in the corner of the reception hall, watching my parents, still standing there, untouched by the warmth of the celebration. I had tried to move past it, to enjoy the moment, to dance with Jake, but their silence had created a chasm between us that I couldn't ignore. I watched the guests mingle, laughing, smiling, but it all felt like background noise to the heavy silence that filled my world. Every so often, I would glance over at my parents, hoping, somehow, they might show a sign of warmth, of acceptance. But there was nothing. No nods, no smiles, no acknowledgement that they were here for me. I had tried to approach them earlier, to make sense of this strange distance between us, but every time I moved toward them, they would subtly shift, as if to avoid the confrontation that I had silently begged for. The more I tried to make things right, the further they seemed to drift. I could see the disappointment in their eyes, and I knew it wasn't just about the wedding. It was something deeper, something that had been building for years. I had been so focused on planning the perfect wedding, on creating a beautiful day for everyone, that I hadn't even stopped to wonder why my parents had become so distant. Was it because of Jake? Was it because of my choices, my life? Did they feel like I was moving too far away from the life they had known for me? The questions lingered in my mind like a heavy fog, suffocating any joy I had left. I glanced at Jake again, and for the first time, I could see the strain on his face. He was enjoying himself, yes, but there was something in his eyes that told me he had noticed the tension too. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. My wedding day, the day I had dreamed of for so long, had become a battleground between my past and my future. Every step I took toward Jake, every vow I made, felt like I was leaving behind pieces of myself. I could see the disappointment in my parents' eyes and feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. It wasn't just their silence that hurt. It was the knowledge that they weren't here for me in the way I needed them to be. I wanted to walk up to them, to scream at them, to ask them why they couldn't just be happy for me. But something inside of me stopped me. Maybe it was the years of conditioning, the years of trying to please them, of being the daughter they wanted me to be. Maybe it was the fear of losing them forever, of realizing that our relationship might never be the same again. As the night wore on, I felt more and more like a stranger in my own life. The music played, the guests danced, but I was stuck in a moment of confusion, of sadness, of regret. I had spent so long trying to please everyone else that I had forgotten to ask myself what I wanted, what I needed. And right now, all I wanted was to feel like I belonged, to feel like I wasn't losing everything. I looked at Jake again, and he smiled at me. But it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I knew he could feel it too, the tension that was hanging in the air like a storm cloud. But what could we do? How could we fix what had already been broken? I knew the answer, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. I wasn't ready to accept that the people I loved the most, the people who had raised me, might never see me the same way again. I stood there, trying to take in everything that was happening around me, but it was hard to focus. The night was supposed to be about Jake and me, but all I could think about were my parents. I tried to keep it together, but the sadness was overwhelming. I hadn't expected them to be angry, to refuse to be part of this important day. It wasn't just the clothes they wore, it wasn't just their silence. It was the way they had distanced themselves from me. They had been everything to me for so long, and now they felt like strangers. My thoughts drifted back to the years growing up. I remembered how my father used to hold my hand, how my mother would comfort me when I was upset, how they would tell me that no matter what, they would always be there for me. I had trusted that, I had relied on it. But now, it was like those memories didn't mean anything. I thought about the moments when they had made me feel like I was the center of their world, the times when their love and approval had felt unconditional. But tonight, it felt like I was invisible to them. I had spent months planning this wedding, making sure everything was perfect, hoping that it would be a day I could remember forever. But instead, it felt like the first step toward losing my family. I glanced at Jake again, trying to read his face. He was still smiling, still trying to enjoy the night, but I could tell he noticed the tension too. He wasn't blind to what was happening, but what could he do? This was my family, my problem to deal with. I had hoped, so badly, that my parents would accept Jake, that they would finally see how happy he made me, how much I needed him in my life. But instead, they acted as though they were watching a stranger marry their daughter. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if I could. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my life had been shaped by my parents' expectations. I had always done what they wanted, made the choices they approved of. I had tried to make them proud. But now, I was starting a new life with Jake, and it was like they couldn't let go. I wasn't the little girl they used to protect anymore. I wasn't the daughter they could control. I was a woman with my own choices, my own life, and that terrified them. I had always thought that family was about support, about standing by each other through thick and thin. But now, it felt like I was standing alone. I wanted to confront them, to ask why they were doing this, why they couldn't just be happy for me. But something in me stopped me. Maybe it was the fear of losing them for good. Maybe it was the hope that, deep down, they still cared for me. But no matter what, I knew things could never go back to the way they were. The night dragged on, and I watched as the last of the guests began to leave. I stayed behind, sitting quietly in the corner, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I should have been happy. I should have been celebrating, dancing, laughing with Jake. But all I could think about were the cold looks from my parents, the way they had shut me out. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just sat there, numb, as the last of the music played and the last of the guests trickled out. My wedding day had come to an end, but it felt like the beginning of something much harder. I woke up the next morning with a sinking feeling in my chest. The house was quiet, too quiet. Jake had already left for work, and I was alone, left to sort through the mess of emotions from the night before. My wedding day had been ruined by the tension between me and my parents. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been broken beyond repair. I spent the morning trying to distract myself, doing the things I usually did when I felt lost, organizing, cleaning, anything to avoid facing the reality that my parents were no longer the people I thought they were. The memory of their cold eyes, their disapproving silence, played over and over in my mind. I couldn't understand what had happened. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who tried to make everyone happy, to live up to their expectations. But now, it felt like they didn't even see me. The woman I had become, the life I had chosen, wasn't something they could accept. I had spent so much time trying to please them, trying to get their approval, that I had lost sight of myself. I had married Jake, and I had hoped that it would be the beginning of something beautiful, something new. But now, it felt like the past was never going to let go. I couldn't help but wonder if I had been living in their shadow all along, making choices that weren't truly mine. Maybe this was the consequence of that. Maybe this was the price I had to pay for finally stepping away from them, for living my own life. As the hours passed, I realized I needed to do something, anything, to break free from this suffocating feeling. I couldn't keep letting my parents control my happiness, even from a distance. They had already shown me how little they cared about the choices I was making. Now, it was time to choose for myself. But how? I had no idea where to start. I thought about calling my mother, about asking her why she couldn't just be happy for me. But I knew the conversation would only lead to more pain, more distance. I didn't want to fight with her, not after everything we had been through. The memories of our better days were too fresh, too important. Yet, I knew that something had to change. I couldn't live in this limbo forever. I decided to reach out to Jake, to tell him what I was feeling, to let him in on the struggle I was facing. But as I sat there, staring at my phone, I realized I didn't want to burden him with this. He was already dealing with his own pressures, his own life. I didn't want to make him feel responsible for fixing something that wasn't his fault. It was my family, my history, my battle to fight. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed to face this head on. But where do I even begin? How do you reconcile a lifetime of love and disappointment with a new life, a new identity? It felt impossible, but I knew I couldn't stay stuck. I had made my choice. I had married Jake. I had started this new chapter in my life. Now, it was time to let go of the past and move forward. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I had to find them. I had to believe that I could heal, that my family could heal, and that I could finally find peace with the choices I had made. The days that followed the wedding felt like a blur, like I was floating through life without truly living it. Jake could see that something was off, but he didn't know how to fix it. I didn't want to burden him with the weight of my family's disapproval, so I kept quiet, pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. My parents' absence in the days after the wedding made the silence even louder. They hadn't reached out to me, not even once. I hadn't expected an apology, but I had hoped for some sign that they still cared. I had always been the one to take the first step, to try and mend the gaps that formed between us over the years. But this time, I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep chasing their approval. It was exhausting, and it wasn't fair to me anymore. One evening, as I sat in the living room, staring out the window, I realized that I had spent my whole life trying to please them. I had molded myself into the daughter they wanted me to be, sacrificing pieces of who I was along the way. But now, I was married. I had my own life, and I had to learn how to live for myself. I didn't want to lose my parents, but I couldn't keep allowing them to control my happiness. As the days passed, I started to feel a strange sense of peace. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I was beginning to understand what it meant to stand up for myself, to make decisions that were right for me. I didn't need their approval anymore, but there was still a part of me that missed them, that longed for their love, their support. I had hoped that one day, they would come around, that they would see that my life was not their life. But as time went on, I realized that hoping for something that might never happen wasn't helping me heal. It was just keeping me stuck in the past. I didn't want to be stuck anymore. I wanted to move forward, to embrace the life I had chosen, the life I had built with Jake. So, I made the decision to stop waiting for my parents to accept me. I couldn't keep holding on to something that was slipping away. I wasn't ready to give up on them completely, but I was ready to let go of the expectation that they would ever see me the way I wanted them to. I had to accept that their love for me, as painful as it was to admit, might never be unconditional again. I had spent so long chasing their approval that I had forgotten what it meant to approve of myself. But now, I was starting to learn. I had to keep reminding myself that I was worthy of love, that I deserved to be happy, even if it meant letting go of what I had once hoped for. I wasn't going to change who I was for anyone anymore. I was enough, just as I was. It was a slow realization, but one that brought me a quiet sense of strength. Jake, seeing the change in me, became even more supportive. He didn't ask questions, he didn't try to fix things, he just stood by me, and that was enough. Together, we started to build the life I had always dreamed of, one where I didn't need anyone's approval but my own. The months passed, and life began to settle into a new routine. I had found a sense of peace that I hadn't known in a long time. Jake and I were building our life together, and despite the pain from my parents' absence, I started to feel like I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be. But then, one afternoon my phone rang. It was my mother. My heart skipped a beat as I hesitated before answering. I had no idea what to expect. Emily. My mother's voice came through the line, strained but softer than I remembered. I need to talk to you. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I wasn't sure what to feel. Was this the moment I had been waiting for? Had she come to accept me? Or was this another attempt to pull me back into their world, a world where I always felt like I didn't quite belong? I took a deep breath and answered, trying to keep my voice steady. What's going on, Mom? There was a long pause, a silence that stretched far longer than I was comfortable with. When she spoke again, her voice cracked just a little. I've been thinking about everything, about the wedding, about what happened between us. I felt my chest tighten. I wasn't sure what this meant, but it was the first time in months that my mother had brought up the wedding or anything related to what had happened that day. I know I hurt you, she continued, her words barely above a whisper. And I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. My mind was spinning. I didn't know how to respond. For so long, I had waited for this moment, the apology that I thought might never come. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. I had spent so much time moving forward, so much time learning to live without their approval, that the thought of going back to the same place of uncertainty and hurt was terrifying. Mom, I said, my voice trembling despite myself. I've spent so much time trying to make things right with you, but it's never been enough. I don't know if I can keep doing this. There was another long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then, her voice came through, quiet but determined. I understand. I really do. But I want you to know that I'm here. If you ever need me, if you want to try again, I'll be here. Her words left a hollow feeling in my chest. I didn't know what to do with them. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't sure if I could. For so long, I had been chasing something from them, something they couldn't give me. And now, I wasn't sure if I wanted it anymore. But there was a part of me, a small part, that still longed for the mother who had once held me close, who had been my biggest supporter. "I'll think about it," I said softly, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. "I'm not sure what this means, but I'm willing to think about it." "That's all I ask," she replied, her voice filled with a mix of relief and sadness. "Just think about it. I'm here when you're ready." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I was ready to let my parents back into my life. But I knew one thing for sure. I had changed. I had learned to stand up for myself, to build a life that was mine. And whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms. The days that followed my conversation with my mother felt strange, like walking in a fog, unsure of which direction to take. I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. The words, "I'm here when you're ready," kept echoing in my mind. It was a lifeline, an opening, but also a reminder of everything I had already lost. I hadn't expected an apology from her, at least not one that sounded so real. But part of me felt that maybe it was too late. Maybe I had already moved on too far to go back. It had been months since the wedding, and during that time, I had learned a lot about myself. I had learned how to stand up for what I needed, how to put myself first, even if it meant walking away from the people I thought I could never live without. Jake had been there for me every step of the way. His patience, his quiet support, had made me realize that I didn't need anyone else's approval. I had found my own voice, and it felt powerful. But now, I was being asked to reconsider. I didn't want to go back to the place where I was constantly seeking their approval, constantly wondering if I was good enough. I didn't want to lose the sense of independence I had fought so hard to gain. But at the same time, the thought of cutting my parents out of my life forever left a bitter taste in my mouth. I hadn't realized how much I still craved their love, their approval, even if it came with so many conditions. The problem was, I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive them for how they had treated me. How could I move forward with them if every interaction was loaded with the weight of the past? I sat on the couch, staring out the window, lost in thought. Jake came into the room, his usual smile on his face, but even he could see the change in me. He sat beside me and put his hand on mine. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I didn't want to burden him with this again. He had always been supportive, always understanding, but I knew he was tired of seeing me struggle with my family. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I want to move on, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm leaving something important behind." Jake didn't say anything for a long moment. He just squeezed my hand gently, as if reminding me that he was there, no matter what. "It's okay to feel conflicted," he said finally. "But you don't have to make any decisions right now. You've done so much for them, Emily. Now, it's time to do something for you." His words felt like a balm to my wounded heart. For so long, I had been trying to keep everyone else happy, and I had lost sight of my own needs. Jake was right. I didn't have to make a decision now. I could take my time, figure out what was best for me. The weight in my chest eased slightly, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't an easy fix. I knew that. But I had come this far, and I wasn't going to let fear or guilt make my decisions for me anymore. I could choose my path, even if that meant stepping away from the people I loved. I could choose to love myself, to live for myself. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, I felt like I was ready to try. The next few days were a blur of quiet contemplation and uneasy steps forward. I knew I had to make a decision, but each time I tried to think about what came next, my mind felt heavy. The conversation with my mother had opened a door, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to walk through it. I couldn't deny the pull of family, the longing to fix what had been broken, but I also couldn't ignore the way I had learned to live without their constant approval. Jake could see I was struggling. He had always been patient with me, but I knew it was wearing on him. He didn't want me to keep carrying this weight alone, but he also didn't want to push me into something I wasn't ready for. He wanted me to find my own way. "You don't have to make any decisions right now," he told me one evening, as we sat on the couch, a quiet movie playing in the background. "You can take your time. Just don't forget that whatever happens, you're not alone." His words felt like a lifeline. For so long, I had been so focused on what my parents thought of me, that I had forgotten to appreciate the support I already had. I wasn't alone. I had Jake, and that was something I couldn't take for granted. The days passed, and slowly, I began to find some peace with myself. I still thought about my parents often, still wondered what it would be like if things were different, but I knew I couldn't keep waiting for them to change. I couldn't spend my life hoping for something that may never come. As much as I wanted to believe that one day my parents would accept me fully, I had to realize that their love, their approval, might always come with conditions. And that was something I had to come to terms with. One afternoon, a few weeks after the phone call with my mother, I received another message from her. It was brief, but the words hit me harder than I expected. "I'm sorry, Emily. I've been thinking about everything, and I want to make things right. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time, the weight of it settling in my chest. I had no idea what to expect from this meeting. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from more disappointment. But another part of me, the part that still longed for my mother's love, wanted to meet her, to see if we could fix this, or at least find some closure. I sat with the decision for a few more days, unsure of what to do. It wasn't just about what my mother wanted. It was about what I needed. I had already made so many changes, already taken so many steps toward building a life I could be proud of. I didn't want to undo that by rushing into something that might break me all over again. Eventually, I decided to meet her. Not because I expected things to be fixed instantly, but because I wanted to take control of my own narrative. I wanted to show myself that I wasn't afraid of facing the past, even if it meant stepping into unknown territory. The day of the meeting arrived, and I found myself sitting across from my mother at a small cafe. She looked different somehow, more vulnerable, less certain of herself than I remembered. I didn't know what to say at first, but when she spoke, the words came tumbling out in a rush. "I know I hurt you, Emily, and I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try. I'm sorry for how I treated you, for how I made you feel like you weren't enough." I listened, my heart torn between the desire to forgive and the pain of everything we had gone through. "I don't know if I can forget," I said quietly, my voice shaking a little. "But I'm willing to try. For us. For me." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, and I felt something shift between us. It wasn't a magic fix, and it wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a start. A start to healing, a start to rebuilding, one step at a time. It wasn't the end of the story, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like the beginning of something better. As the weeks passed after that meeting with my mother, I started to feel a sense of change, but it wasn't immediate. It wasn't something that could be fixed in a single conversation or even a series of apologies. The relationship I had with my parents was complicated, layered with years of expectations, disappointments, and love that had been strained over time. But what I realized was that healing, at least for me, wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened or pretending things had never gotten to that point. Healing was about accepting the imperfections, the mistakes, and moving forward anyway. I didn't expect my parents to change overnight. I knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. But I also knew that I had changed, and I was no longer the person who needed their validation to feel whole. I had learned to stand up for myself, to prioritize my own happiness, and to accept that some things, some relationships, would always be a work in progress. Jake and I continued to build our life together, slowly but steadily. There were moments when the weight of my family's absence still felt heavy, but with Jake by my side, I had a sense of stability that I had never fully experienced before. His support, his love, gave me the strength to face the days that were hard and the courage to keep moving forward. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Jake turned to me, his face soft but serious. "You know," he began, his voice gentle, "I'm proud of you. For everything. For how far you've come." I looked at him, unsure of what to say. "I didn't do anything," I replied, the words feeling awkward in my mouth. "You did," Jake said, his hand reaching across the table to hold mine. "You've done the hardest part. You've found your voice. You've learned to choose yourself. That's not easy." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. It wasn't always easy, no, but I had learned so much in the past few months. I had learned that it was okay to let go of things that didn't serve me, even if they were once the most important things in my life. And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about having all the answers or fixing everything at once. It was about accepting that I was enough, just as I was. For the first time in years, I felt free from the weight of my parents' expectations. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed that I could build a life that was entirely my own. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was facing it, learning from it, and using it to build something stronger. And with Jake by my side, I knew that I could face whatever came next, knowing I had the strength to overcome it. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt ready for it. It had been months since that meeting with my mother, and though time had given me space to think, the sense of unresolved tension still lingered in the back of my mind. My parents had reached out a few times after our conversation, but things never seemed to go beyond surface-level exchanges. I had stopped waiting for the kind of relationship I had once hoped for, but a part of me still wondered if I was making the right decision. Was I truly ready to let go of the dream of a perfect family, or was I simply too afraid to face the truth of how much I had been hurt? One afternoon, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, Jake came outside and sat beside me. He could tell something was on my mind. "You seem distant today," he said, his voice soft and understanding. I looked at him, trying to gather my thoughts. "I don't know," I said, shaking my head slightly. "I just keep thinking about my parents, about everything that's happened. I don't know if I made the right choice by cutting them out of my life, even if it was only temporary." Jake reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "Emily, I know it's hard, but you've come so far. You've made the choice that's right for you, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. You're not alone in this. I'm here." His words brought a sense of peace, but the unease still lingered inside me. I didn't want to keep questioning my decisions, but I couldn't help it. Every time I thought about my parents, I felt this tight knot in my chest, a mix of guilt and longing. The idea of rebuilding that connection with them seemed like an impossible task, and yet, I couldn't entirely let it go. Later that evening, as I sat in bed, I found myself looking at old photos of my family. There were so many memories, so many happy moments that seemed like they belonged to a different life. I thought about the woman I had been before all the pain started, the daughter who believed that family was everything. But the woman I was now was someone different, someone who had learned the hard way that sometimes, family doesn't always have your best interests at heart. As much as I missed the idea of what my family used to be, I couldn't deny the truth that had become clear to me over the past few months. I had learned to live for myself, to make decisions based on what was best for me, not what others expected. And that was a powerful feeling, one I couldn't ignore. I knew that no matter what happened with my parents, I had to stay true to myself. I couldn't let their absence define me or dictate the choices I made moving forward. It was time to take the next step, to stop looking back, and to start embracing the life I had with Jake. Slowly, I started to feel a sense of closure, not because the situation was perfect, but because I had accepted it. I had stopped waiting for my parents to validate my decisions, and in doing so, I had finally given myself the permission to move on. It wasn't easy, and I knew there would still be moments of doubt and sadness, but I also knew that I had the strength to handle whatever came my way. Jake and I had built something beautiful, something I could be proud of, and that, I realized, was enough. As the months went on, I started to feel like I was truly finding my footing. Jake and I settled into a rhythm, our lives intertwining in a way that felt natural, comforting. We didn't talk about my parents every day, but there were times when I could sense that both of us were quietly processing what had happened, the space that had grown between me and them. I found myself thinking less and less about their absence, focusing more on the life I was building with Jake. But then, one evening, as I sat alone in the living room reading a book, my phone rang. It was my mother. My heart skipped a beat, a rush of emotions flooding through me. After everything that had happened, after the years of trying to rebuild something with them, I wasn't sure what this call meant. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emily." My mother's voice came through, soft but clear. "I've been thinking a lot, and I want to talk to you. Can we meet?" I wasn't sure how to react. I had come so far since our last conversation, so far from the person who spent every moment hoping for their approval. Was I ready for this? Was I ready to face my mother again? To possibly revisit all the unresolved pain? My mind was racing, but I took a deep breath. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'll meet you." The meeting was scheduled for a few days later, and the anticipation weighed on me the whole time. I couldn't help but wonder what my mother was thinking, what she was hoping to achieve by meeting again. Was this another attempt to apologize, to make things right? Or was it something else entirely? The day of the meeting, I found myself more nervous than I expected. I had spent so much time learning to live without her, without their approval, that the thought of reopening that chapter made me uneasy. But I had promised myself that I would face whatever came next with an open heart. I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a quiet corner table by the window. When my mother walked in, she looked the same, yet somehow different. Her face showed signs of aging, but there was something softer in her eyes, something that spoke of regret, of wanting to fix what had been broken. She sat down across from me, and for a few moments, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't the cold, uncomfortable silence it used to be. It was more tentative. "I know I've hurt you, Emily," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "And I'm sorry. I've spent so much time trying to protect myself that I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. I should have done better. I want to try to make things right." I looked at her, not sure what to say. Part of me wanted to shout, to demand answers for all the years of disappointment and heartache. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger over the past few months, felt a sense of calm. I didn't need to hold on to the pain anymore. I didn't need to carry it around like a burden. "I've been trying to make peace with everything," I said softly. "I've had to learn to live for myself, to stop needing your approval. But that doesn't mean I don't still care about you. I just can't go back to the way things were." My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand," she said quietly. "I don't expect things to go back to the way they were, but I want to start again. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." It wasn't a grand gesture, and it wasn't a perfect resolution. But in that moment, I realized that sometimes healing isn't about fixing everything at once. It's about taking small steps, about moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers. We didn't make any promises, but we agreed to try, to rebuild, one step at a time. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face it. Whatever came next, I knew that I could handle it. I had learned how to stand on my own, and now, I was ready to let my family back in on my terms. The weeks following our meeting were filled with a quiet kind of uncertainty. My mother and I had agreed to try again, but the road ahead didn't feel simple. We didn't have the kind of immediate breakthrough I had hoped for. Instead, we started to rebuild slowly, cautiously. There were moments when it felt like nothing had changed, when the distance between us seemed just as wide as before. But then, little by little, things began to shift. My mother reached out more often. She'd call just to check in, asking about how Jake and I were doing, how I was adjusting to life after the wedding. At first, her calls felt strange, like they didn't belong in this new version of my life. But with each conversation, I started to realize that the distance between us wasn't as impossible to bridge as I had thought. It was going to take time, but that didn't mean it was hopeless. I didn't expect things to go back to the way they were before. I didn't expect us to pick up where we left off. That wasn't what I wanted anymore. What I wanted was something real, something honest. And I knew that if we were ever going to have that, we both needed to face the past, no matter how painful it was. Jake noticed the subtle changes in me. I wasn't talking as much about my parents, but I could tell that he knew I was still processing everything. He would catch me lost in thought sometimes, my mind drifting back to moments with them that still hurt, still stung. But he never pushed me to talk about it. He simply let me work through it in my own way, at my own pace. It was a gift, one that I didn't realize I needed until I had it. I started to see the progress, the small victories that I had been overlooking. I was no longer seeking my parents' approval, no longer letting their opinions dictate my choices. But I was also no longer cutting them out of my life completely. I had found a balance, one that allowed me to exist as I was, without needing their validation, but also without completely shutting them out. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. One afternoon, a few months later, my mother invited me to lunch. We met at the same cafe where we had sat together before, and this time, it felt different. There was no tension hanging in the air, no heavy silence between us. We simply sat and talked. She asked about my work, about Jake, about the things that mattered to me now. And I realized, for the first time in a long while, that I was finally able to talk to her as an adult. I could share my life without feeling like I had to explain myself, without feeling like I was asking for permission. It was liberating. As the lunch came to an end, my mother looked at me with a softness in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You've become someone I can admire. I know it's been hard, but you've found your strength. And I'm proud of that." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to hearing her say things like that. But in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need to hear it from her to believe it. I had already started to believe it myself. I had already learned to be proud of who I was, of the journey I had been on, and of the life I was building. Thank you, I said, my voice soft. That means a lot to me. We left the cafe that day with a sense of quiet understanding between us. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was another step in the right direction. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I was no longer afraid of it. I had learned to embrace the unknown, to trust that I had the strength to handle whatever came my way. And with Jake by my side, I knew I could face anything. As the months continued to pass, the space between me and my parents remained, but something in me had shifted. It wasn't the loud, dramatic breakthrough I had once imagined, but a quiet acceptance that this was how things were. I had started to understand that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. There were still times when I would think about my past, about the years I spent trying to gain their approval, wondering if I had made the right decision in cutting them out of my life for so long. But each time those thoughts arose, I remembered how far I had come. I remembered how I had learned to stand on my own, to build a life with Jake, a life that was mine. Jake had been my rock throughout all of this. His support, his belief in me, had given me the courage to face the hard truths about my relationship with my parents. I had learned to trust myself, to put my own needs first, and that made all the difference. I no longer felt like I was running away from my past. I had accepted it, learned from it, and moved forward. I had stopped waiting for my parents to validate my choices. I was no longer waiting for their approval to define who I was. But that didn't mean I had stopped loving them. It didn't mean I had stopped wishing for a different kind of relationship with them. I just knew that I couldn't keep putting my life on hold, hoping for something that might never come. One afternoon, I received another message from my mother. It was short, but it caught me off guard. "Emily," it said, "I know it's been a while, but I've been thinking a lot about you. I miss you. Can we talk?" My heart skipped a beat. I had come to a place where I had accepted the distance, where I had stopped expecting anything from her. And yet, here she was, reaching out again. I sat with the message for a while, uncertain of what to do. I had come so far in my healing, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to open that door again. But something inside me told me that this was a moment I couldn't ignore. I had already been down the road of silence and distance. Maybe this was the time to see if we could rebuild something, even if it wasn't perfect. I took a deep breath and replied, "I'd like to talk." We set up a time to meet, and when the day came, I felt a mix of emotions. There was apprehension, but there was also a sense of curiosity. What had changed? What was she hoping for this time? When I arrived at the cafe, my mother was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked older, softer, and there was something different about her. She didn't have the same hardened look in her eyes that I remembered. When I sat down across from her, she immediately reached for my hand. "I've missed you so much, Emily," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you, and I'm so sorry for that." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I held it together. "I've missed you too," I said, my voice steady. "But it's been a long road for me, and I can't just forget everything that happened." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't expect you to forget. I just want to make things right, if you'll let me." I looked at her, searching her face for something I hadn't seen before, a sincerity, a willingness to change. And for the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we could start again. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. "We can try," I said quietly. "But it's going to take time. I need to be sure that I'm not just going to fall back into old patterns." She nodded again, squeezing my hand. "I understand, and I'm willing to take it slow. I just want to be part of your life again." The conversation wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a start. It wasn't the magical fix I had once hoped for, but it was honest, and that felt like enough for now. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I wasn't going to be afraid of it anymore. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it, with Jake by my side, and with the strength I had found in myself. The days following my meeting with my mother were filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. I didn't expect things to change overnight, and they didn't. But something had shifted inside me. The tension that had built up over the years, the wall I had put between myself and my family, began to feel a little less suffocating. I didn't know where this new chapter would take me, but I was willing to see it through, no matter how difficult it might be. My relationship with my mother wasn't fixed, It was a slow process, one that required patience and understanding from both sides. We started with small gestures, checking in on each other more regularly, talking about the everyday things that we had missed for so long. At first, it felt awkward, like we were strangers learning to speak each other's language again. But with each conversation, I began to feel like we were rebuilding something, piece by piece. Jake noticed the change in me. I wasn't carrying the same weight of guilt and doubt that I had before. It was as if a heavy fog had lifted, and I could finally see my own life clearly. He was proud of me, of how far I had come, but he never pushed me to do anything I wasn't ready for. He let me take my time, and that support, that space, meant more to me than I could put into words. One evening, as we sat on the couch after dinner, Jake turned to me, his eyes filled with warmth and care. "I've noticed a change in you," he said softly. "You seem lighter, like you're carrying less weight." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I think I am," I said. "It's still a process, but I'm starting to feel like myself again." "You're not alone in this, you know," he added, squeezing my hand. "I'm right here with you." His words, simple yet powerful, reminded me of the strength of the partnership we had built together. I didn't need to go through this alone. I had Jake, and that was all I needed to keep moving forward. In the weeks that followed, I continued to rebuild my relationship with my mother, one small step at a time. There were still moments when I felt the weight of the past, moments when the pain of what had happened threatened to pull me back into old patterns of doubt and fear. But I didn't let those moments define me anymore. I knew now that I had the strength to face whatever came my way. The journey wasn't going to be easy, but I was no longer afraid of it. I had learned to let go of the need for perfection, the need for things to be fixed in an instant. I had learned that healing takes time, that relationships take work, and that sometimes the most important thing is simply showing up, being present, and taking one step forward, no matter how small. One day, my mother invited me over to her house for lunch. It was the first time in months that we had spent time together in person. When I walked into her kitchen, I was surprised to find that things felt different. The air between us wasn't charged with tension, wasn't filled with the unspoken words that had once weighed so heavily. It was just calm. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice soft but warm. "I've missed you." I smiled, feeling a flicker of hope in my chest. "I've missed you too," I said. It wasn't the perfect reunion, but it was a start. And for the first time, I felt like we could build something real, something that didn't depend on the past, but was rooted in the present. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would be bumps along the way. But I was ready to face them. With Jake by my side, and with a renewed sense of self, I knew that I could handle whatever came next.